Trek Voyager was hurtling towards its 7-year finale. UPN was keen to get another Star Trek show into production as fast as possible. In fact, it would be the same year, just 6 months later. TV producers and executives scrambled to get a new show developed and launched in a very short period of time. And to make matters worse, the show would debut in September of 2001, which of course would have massive repercussions for how television and films were made after this time. The resulting TV show would be Enterprise, later renamed to Star Trek Enterprise, and it would run for 4 years, before being cut short in 2005. Now this show is often unfairly maligned and remembered quite unfondly by the fan community, and I think it's a real shame because I think it's a victim of its timing really of when it was released, because the show actually got better and better year on year. True, I think the first year was a little bit slow, but after that it really did pick up, and by the time it got to season 3 and 4 it became a really good, interesting TV show. And interestingly, it was around this time that Playmates gave up the license to Star Trek, and Art Asylum, who would eventually become Diamond Select, picked up the license. And they started by producing figures of Enterprise for its first season. Now sadly, this line only went to 2 series, but they also managed to do a builder playset as part of it. And ironically, it would be Star Trek Enterprise that had the most consistent figures produced under Diamond Select or Art Asylum during this time. Classic Trek would of course go on to have multiple series, but they never started to build a bridge set. Next Generation would enjoy a full crew being produced, but not many aliens, whilst Deep Space Nine only had a partial crew put out, and Voyager had nothing at all. So over the course of 2 videos, I'm going to be taking a look at the Star Trek Enterprise figures and the bridge playset that you're able to build. Today, I'll just be looking at the Star Trek Enterprise figures. All of the figures would be released in the same sort of style of clamshell packaging. Series 1 figures would be in a silver grey, whilst the Series 2 would be in a more of a browny gold kind of colour. So starting off with Captain Archer, we can see that the presentation is very nice, it's very screen accurate. There's the Enterprise logo on his sleeve there, they've got the lemon piping at the top to denote his rank, and the overall sculpting is pretty nicely done. Lots of folds in the fabric there to recreate that look of the jumpsuit that they have in the show. However, you may notice that between the waist and the upper thigh, there is a slight discoloration there, and there's no exposed joints or joins. This is because they've used a rubber material instead of hard plastic. Now, this has the effect, obviously, of looking a bit more lifelike. It managed to hide those joints there around the hips, which is great. But it can look a little bit odd considering the rest of the figure is in a hard plastic. So I'm not sure this really works, and it can look a little bit odd, especially over time when the rubber started to, discolour a little bit. And even at the time, it wasn't quite matching, so this looks a little bit off, a little bit strange. And I'm not really sure what the thinking was here, because we do have exposed joints elsewhere in the arms, etc. So I'm not sure why they did this. I think it was experimental, and I think they were hoping it would look a bit more seamless when the figures were sitting down, but as you'll see in the next video, that the rubber works against the articulation. Now, I have to say that the Enterprise line actually had very good likenesses across the board. This was a time when Art Asylum were struggling with this. If we look at their Nemesis figures, for example, and some of their classic Trek figures, and certainly their movie figures, definitely had some issues with the likenesses. But Enterprise seems pretty solid. So we can see here, obviously, that this is a pretty good likeness of Scott Bakula. The articulation is the same across all the figures, so I'll just demo it here with Archer. He has a ball jointed neck, so he can spin his neck all the way around from side to side, and there's a little bit of give going forwards and backwards, but not a lot. Now we can see some of the rubber here on his collar again, and this is very welcome here because it's actually aiding the articulation. It doesn't stop it, it's not hindering the neck from spinning from side to side, which is great. Now, he does have ball-jointed shoulders, of course, and he also has the bicep swivel as well. He has single-jointed elbows, and he has swivel wrists as well, so they can spin 360 degrees, but there is no hinge there. They can't bend forwards or backwards. That's all they can do. Now, there's not really much articulation in the waist. He can kind of move from side to side, but it's difficult to know what that joint is, and I feel like it's coming from the legs rather than the waist itself. Now, there is clearly a hinge joint at the hips because you can kick the legs out from side to side, and here you can see how the rubber is disguising that joint, but you can also see the unsightly join between the rubber and the leg, the discoloration there, but also a little bit of the glue. Now, you can kick the legs forwards, and they can go back a little bit as well, which is good, and he also has those single jointed knees there. Now, there is some articulation in the foot because you can move it ever so slightly, but it's not enough to really make any kind of dent. You can't really articulate it forwards or backwards or really pivot it from side to side, but there's a little bit of a wobble there. Now, all the figures would have accessories included. Some will have more than others, but every figure would have a phaser, a data pad, a communicator. Also, each figure would come with a Star Trek coin, which would have the image of the NX-01 on it and the character's name. Not quite sure why, but there you go. Some would have an extra pair of hands, whilst Reed would actually come with a phaser case, and I'll have a look a bit more at that later. And most of the figures hold their accessories perfectly well with the hands that they have. So in this case, Archer can hold his phaser in his right hand, he can hold his communicator in his left, and he looks really good doing it. Now, I really love this Archer figure. I think they've done a fantastic job. I've got some gripes around the rubber band that he's got there, but otherwise I think the likeness is great, and I really like it. I'm really chuffed, and I think it's just as well because this to date is so far the only Archer figure that we've ever got. Moving on to T'Pol, we can see obviously this is her Season 1 outfit. It is again very faithfully recreated. This is a really good sculpt and good mould, and I think they've pretty much nailed the look here. T'Pol would be the only female figure released in this wave, and the only one produced in her crew uniform. So T'Pol is unique in the line and has a unique body sculpt. And again, in terms of the likeness, although it's not perfect, I think this is a pretty damn close approximation. I think this looks really solid. I really couldn't fault them here. They seem to have got all the paint apps right, and yeah, this looks really good. And here she is, of course, with her Vulcan salute and, of course, her communicator as well. So, looking really good. Really appreciate them putting in the Vulcan salute hand there. I think that's really essential for any Vulcan, and it really just sets off the figure. So I love this. I think they've done a fantastic job. Next up, we have Mayweather. It's worth pointing out that actually this is a slightly different body mould to the Captain Archer. Captain Archer is a bit broader and a bit taller, so it's nice that they've actually bothered to recreate that and make it screen accurate. But otherwise, this is pretty much what we've seen with the Captain Archer. It's the same blue overalls, and there's not a lot more to it, even in terms of the accessories. Now, I'd have to say, for this one, I think the likeness is less impressive. It feels a little bit more simplistic, and I don't know if it's really caught the likeness of the actor that strongly, but that said, I still think it's a decent sculpt, and, you know, it looks pretty good. Then we have the Reed figure. Now, on the surface, this looks to be using pretty much the same body as the Mayweather. In terms of the scale and shape and size of it, it's more of a slender look. However, I do think there's very subtle differences in the moulding when I look at the creases in the pants particularly. Now, I could be wrong, I could be just seeing things now, but I think there are little nuances, actually, to each sculpt. Also, Reed comes with his usual accessories, the phaser, pistol, the communicator, but he also has this fantastic trunk, which actually, when you open it up, has an extra 2 phasers in there. I love that. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And here he is with his face, and of course his case there, his mini armory that he's got with him. And I think this is really cool. And again, I think the likeness is pretty strong in this figure. It does look like Reed's a bit more tired here, but nevertheless, I think they've done a really good job of capturing the actor's likeness and yeah, putting it into figure form. And then finally, we have Trip. Now, Trip wasn't a straight release, he wasn't part of the original first wave of figures that went out. He was an internet exclusive, and he was only available through New Force Comics in the United States and Forbidden Planet in the UK. And as a result, he's much harder to pick up on the second-hand market than the rest of the figures in this line. And this is something they would repeat with Phlox, who is undoubtedly the hardest figure to pick up in this line. Now, in terms of the likeness here with Trip, I feel it's a little bit soft. It's a little bit disappointing. Obviously, Trip is one of the major characters in this series. He's one of the triumvirate. And yeah, I think although the likeness is fine, it just feels a little bit soft. There's not a lot of the detail, the lines, and the detailing on that you see on the actor's face. And I think it is recognisable as Trip, but it's not quite as solid as some of the others, say the Archer, for example. Now, aside from releasing the crew in their standard blue uniform, they also release them in their spacesuits as well. I think this is a really cool extra touch because this is something they would often suit up in the show, and it's very distinctive, and they've done a really fantastic job of recreating them. Here I'm looking at the Trip figure, but again, most of the figures in the wave have the same look, feel and design in terms of articulation. They each come with a removable helmet and also a removable chest plate. Now, the chest plate is a hard plastic, and you can see there's nice little details here having the name on there and also the Enterprise logo. I think this is really cool, like it's very fine detail and it looks really great. And overall, I think the paint apps are really nice on these figures. And again, on the reverse of the backpack, we can see a lot of detail, nice paint taps, and of course, there's actually rubber hose that goes from the helmet into the backpack. And I love this, and I think it just gives it a sense of authenticity, and it just looks really, really good. These figures are mostly free from the rubber, but we can see a tiny little bit just placed over the elbow. And again, I think this works really well. It's a very small strip, so it doesn't look too obvious when it's discoloured, but it also covers that joint very effectively. So I think this is a nice touch, and it works well here, much better than the pants. So here is the Archer from the same away team wave, and you can see obviously I've taken the helmet off and the breastplate off there, so you can see the figure underneath and you can get a sense of what the costume looks like. Now, one of the things I will point out is that actually this is a completely unique mould. So Archer is very different from the Trip. He's a lot broader and a lot taller. And here you can see the difference between the two figures. The Archer has a much chunkier mould and is a lot broader. And I think you have to give Asylum top marks for that, because it would have been so easy to just replicate the same bodies and just change the heads. But they've actually gone the extra mile and actually tried to make them unique and different and, true to what you see on screen. Now, in this second wave, or this away team wave, we had obviously Archer, Trip, T'Pol, but also Hoshi. And this would be the only way that Hoshi was released. Sadly, she was never released in her standard uniform, but at least we did get her in this away team wave. And then likewise, they also had a special release of Dr. Phlox. As I said before, he's very, very difficult to track down now. He wasn't exclusive, he was difficult at the time, he's even harder to get hold of now, and I've seen him go for some silly money online. But to their credit, Asylum did manage to get the whole crew out, and that is the crucial thing. It's not perfect, it's not ideal. I would have liked to have obviously had them all in a consistent uniform, and if I was going to choose it, it would have been the blue uniform, and obviously Phlox in his usual outfits, his doctor outfit. But at least you do have the heads here, so if you can get hold of them, you could do some customizations of your own and have the whole crew. So there you have it. That's part one of my overview of the Enterprise releases. Obviously focusing on the crew this week, but soon I will do the part two, and I will focus on the bridge set and the aliens that were released in this line as well. I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as I will be posting more videos soon.